Good evening, friends. Welcome to this fourth and the last technical session of the first day of this course. And we will have today the discussion on the remaining methods of determining the arm's length price. You had a discussion in the earlier session on the transactional methods, and now we'll be having a discussion on profit-based methods. And there are essentially two methods, but both are in a way extreme, because TNMM is among the most frequently used method and PSM is a method which is hardly used. So we will have both these extremes discussed by our speaker today, Ms. Fuchi Ray. She is a director in Deloitte's in the transfer pricing practice, and she has got 11 years of handling various transfer pricing issues as well as international tax issues. So we have a good combination over here. Normally, typically, these two departments are looked at separately, and one wouldn't like to give opinions on the other. Anyway, she has assisted various multinational companies in several industries, and not only at the advisory level, but even subsequently at the litigation stage also. And she has presented several papers in various forums, Bombay Chartered Accountants Society, Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, etc. And I'm sure we can look forward to vast amount of knowledge and experience in this session. Without spending more of taking more of her time, I'll request her to begin her session. However, before that, may I request Natubai Thakrar to present to her a memento as a mark of her love and affection. Yeah, Ms. Fuji.
Thanks for the kind words, and actually my colleague Mr. Anish Chakravarti was to take that session, but he had some conflicted schedule and I got to know it 2-3 days back, but I think it's good to have a lady speaker on the International Women's Day. So very pleasure to be here. And actually Mr. Kane has talked about RPM and CPM, and I think my life is now easy to really speak about TNMM. You already have got session on the functional and comparability analysis. I'll take up those things also because those things are very much important to apply TNMM practically. As sir said that we have two methods, profit split method and transactional net margin method, but I think TNMM is the most widely applied method, and if used I'll say commercially, if used logically, if used rationally, and if used with conviction, it is a method with which you can really sail through your transactions, but there are certain precautions which you have to really take care. We have some case study, and I'll check knowledge, but what I have done is that actually that knowledge check has come in the printouts. So we'll go with the methods first. So this we have already covered that profit-based has got these two methods, PSM and TNMM, and we have got within PSM we have got contribution analysis, which is ex ante sometimes called, and residual analysis, which is ex post. I'll take profit split method first because it's a method which is not really widely used, but it's a method where you can really feel certain circumstances which you can come across in your clientele where this method can be used. It's a method which is a very typical way of really applying that method. So I'll just take up that method first, and then we'll take up TNMM. So what is PSM? It's as the name suggests, it is profit split method. So what it does is it actually allocates the combined operating profits or the losses from controlled transactions. So in any transactions we have two parties. You have a combined profit in the whole value chain. You divide the profit in those two entities based on their functions, assets and risks. So since morning you have been understanding that the compensation has to be really aligned to the functional profile of the entities. So this method also is very much in alignment with the same principle, but in this case there is nothing like that this entity needs to earn this much and the residue will go to this much. This particular profit looks at the whole value chain and then sees that this much should be belonging to entity A and the rest should be belonging to entity B. Now in the circumstances in which it is actually applicable, where you have very integrated operations. So I'll just give you an example. Say take an example of a vehicle manufacturing company or a pharma company. In case of a say vehicle manufacturing company, one entity say has got a complete R&D facility, but for applying that R&D or for conducting that R&D, the bodies, the vehicle bodies have to be sent by another company. So this company cannot really work till the time this entity is able to supply the material. So therefore their operations are so integrated that both the companies have to contribute, and then only the research, further research can be carried out, and then possibly commercially the products will be there in the market. So in these kind of cases where you see that one person is so much interdependent on the other person that those companies cannot really work on a standalone basis, in those kind of cases we should be applying a profit split method. Primarily interdependency we have seen in case when one company is having very unique intangibles which are non-routine in nature. So as I just suggested, how does it work? We have a combined profit, we have to perform the functional analysis, and then we have to split the net profit, and the profit which is then arrived is considered at arm's length, because while carrying out the whole allocation, the external comparability is considered. So I'll just come to that, but I just thought that it will be good to really explain it on an overall basis. So again, what I just suggested, I just put it in the form of a diagram, that you have an aggregate profits in the controlled transaction. Based on the contribution, you are really dividing the profit between party X and party Y. Similar is the case there. Okay, this is another step ahead of profit split method, which is there even in Indian regulations also, which says residual profit split method. So what does it mean is that there are two entities, or there may be more than two entities also in the system. Few of them or most all of them may be doing some routine functions. Say one entity is actually doing only sales, one entity is only doing R&D, one entity is only doing manufacturing. So what we can do is, or one entity may be only providing the shared services, but the operations are so integrated in nature that you cannot really attribute one particular the complete contribution, the net profit of the complete value chain to one entity or to all of them in a particular ratio, because all of them are carrying out the operations which are distinct from each other. You cannot compare R&D with manufacturing, you cannot compare shared services with say sales and support. So what happens is that based on their functional analysis, a routine return is given to those entities. So say for shared services, if 10 or 12% is considered sufficient, so whatever is cost which has been incurred by that entity, cost plus 10% is given to that entity. Similarly, if R&D say 18% or 20% is considered arm's length, so 20%. So based on the external benchmarkings, you give the routine return to those entities. After doing that, there will still be some residue profits which will be there in the system. Now that residue profits is then allocated to these entities. So this is called the residual profit. The strength of the PSM, I have an example also later. The strength of the PSM is that it is suitable for the highly integrated operations, as I just suggested, where the traditional methods really prove inappropriate. Something like RPM that cannot be applicable where you have integrated operations, or CUP you cannot really apply, and say CPM you cannot apply, or TNMM you cannot apply. So depending upon the facts and circumstances of the case, if you believe that the operations are highly integrated, then this method is something which kind of sometimes even solves the insoluble cases also. It offers flexibility. Flexibility in terms of, because you are not really looking at lot of external data, you are trying to see that okay, this is my whole value chain, and within this how a rational person or how a rational businessman would have kind of divided the profits, and then compare it with external comparables. And again, it depends upon that how much efficient the companies are and how much synergy they are able to provide to each other because of the integrated operations. The weaknesses are quite obvious. One is that it is not really widely accepted method. So what happens is that at the time of assessments, I mean, it's an apprehension while applying this method that the method will not be really appreciated by the authorities, and therefore let's find out some other method. That's one. Sometimes because if you are dealing with international in an international transfer pricing scenario, it's possible that your foreign affiliate is in some other location where you want to have that external database access, but you are not able to have that because of some reason. So then it becomes difficult to apply, and sometimes it becomes difficult to really understand that what has been the overall costs of the entities. I'll take up TNMM little later. I'll just come to the case study first, so that we can just completely finish off PSM, and then I thought I'll take the case study of all of them separately. So I'll just request you to come to slide number 19. Now, this is a case where I think I'm clear on the overall understanding of the PSM per se, because this case law will just relate the figures to what I just suggested, though with a different example. Here we have taken an example of a multimedia company which is responsible for broadcasting the content through various multimedia channels all over the world. This company has got various subsidiaries, and it provides the television network feed to various broadcasters, and the broadcasters may or may not be third parties. Each subsidiary is responsible for the content development. So basically the programs which we watch on the TV is the content, and the broadcaster may be the channel. Channels sometimes have their own content, sometimes they buy the contents from the others, from anybody. Sometimes, so to ensure the product appropriate content development, there is a particular R&D which is being performed, and in multimedia you need to also have a network. So that's also there in this case. So overall, all the entities, some of them are really developing content, some of them are doing R&D. However, the final output, final revenue will come only when the program is actually broadcasted on the TV or on the media. So we'll need to, so in this case I have taken an example of RPSM that again, I mean, so the correct pool of global profits, we should know that, okay, this is the cost of each entities. Identify the routine activities by carrying out a functional analysis, give them the routine cost return, and then whatever is left, it will again be given to those entities in a particular ratio. So I'll just come to that. Right. Okay. This is again just what I said in the form of a diagram only. Okay. Now coming to slide 24, assume there are significant intangible income to be allocated. Now I am coming to basically say, suppose routine functions, which are basically the content development, sales support, or the network cost. So these are the routine functions also, as well as they may be adding value to the overall chain. So in that case, what should be the allocation? So say, for example, overall based on the value chain, we see that my routine EBITDA before tax is somewhere near 20%, and my non-routine is 80%. So firstly, we need to really see the allocation, and based on the functional analysis, see, it is very important to understand in PSM that what are the value drivers of the business. So say in case of a pharma company, it is possible that in case of a branded product, the brand itself is a value driver, the marketing may not be a value driver. But in case of a generic drug, for which the patent has already been expired, the generic drug itself may not be the value driver, because it is available with various manufacturers or various companies. However, the marketing of that may be a value driver. So based on the complete functional analysis has to be done in such a manner that we are able to understand and we are able to extract that information from the taxpayer, that who is the value driver, and the ways to do it, to really talk to their business teams and to go on to their site also to sometimes understand that where the really efforts being put on to increase the turnover. Now in this case, it was, say, assumption is that non-routine is somewhere near 80% and routine is 20%. and we have to give weight to these three entities: R&D, multimedia, and network. So now how to give the weights to these entities? Again, the weight which has to be given is, so say something like network cost, or say sales. How you will really how will you give weight to particular sales function? So you may see that how many people are there in their marketing department, on what basis they are being given the bonuses, and how much is their total cost. So, and whether it's the marketing function which is really leading to the final sale. Okay, coming to these are the ways and means of really getting to the weights, but I'll not take them because there are sometimes you need to use the regression analysis also, but it's not must thing. I think overall, if I need to, I'll just take this example so that we are, we focus on what we have understood in general. But I've just given those slides more from the technical perspective if somebody wants to really apply it. But it's not that's the only rule also. It's just that it's an example, so it has given the mechanics. Now I come to the example. So say all these entities, India, Singapore, US, Canada, Thailand, BV, they have this gross revenue. There are third party costs, so you come to the net revenue. Because the residue profits which we will have to, it has to be after the costs, and which does not have the intercompany transaction. Now say this is the cost which they already have in their books of accounts. This is just collation of their whole P&L account in one slide deck. Now coming to this will become post TP. Now how it is becoming? For the selling, marketing, network maintenance, general administration and depreciation, these companies are being given a particular return, and where they are getting the return is on slide 29. That assume that the routine return for the functions based on the market benchmarks are as follows. For assets, basically for the depreciation, will give them 6%. For the sales and marketing, will give them cost plus 6. For the network maintenance, cost plus 8, and for the general and administration, cost plus 5. So this becomes the routine return, and then comes the value drivers. Value driver in this case are multimedia, because that's something which you are actually selling. The research and development, because the content is something whether the customers will really like or not. And the network, that in the overall world in which all regions you are able to really go. So these were the factors which have been identified in this case to ensure that, okay, because of these three things, we are really increasing the turnover of the overall group. And these are the weights which have been given to these three functions: network 50%, multimedia 33%, R&D 17%. Now you will ask that, okay, how these weights have been assigned. So in OECD there are one or two ways, and even regulations do not really speak about how the weights have to be assigned. But if you read chapter 2 of OECD, it very beautifully explains how the weights have to be assigned. So if I take just this example, in this case there are 2 or 3 things by which you can find out how the weights have to be assigned. You actually look at the cost of the overall the overall cost of that particular function within the overall group. So say if you get actually the overall P&L account, you will see that the network cost lying in the group itself is 50% of the overall cost. So therefore, even if we give the 50% weight to network cost, that should be fine, because network cost inherently it has been actually paid to third parties. So per se, taking 50% of the overall cost is something giving the profit to the person who has performed or who has incurred that much cost in the whole system. R&D 17%, again it may be based on that in my overall P&L it's the 17% of the cost which I have incurred, and therefore 17%. This is one of the methods. And the second method is that you actually look at some external comparables P&L and then see that, okay, what are the weights can be given. And the third is where I have just used some regression analysis to arrive at these weights. So if we give these routine returns, now we'll just concentrate on this 6%, 8%, 5%. So then coming to slide 31, it has given these routine returns, total cost plus markup. So if I just slide 30, the total cost, say India 3.77, 2.36, 15.34, 19.11, this becomes 40.58, and if I apply those 6%, 2%, 5%, 8%, that comes to 2.43. So therefore my total cost plus markup for India becomes 43.01, and this is the way it has to be applied to all the entities, and then it becomes your residue profits which has now to be allocated, and then you will apply it again in the form of ratio which has already been as per the value driver, that out of the total cost what is the cost incurred by this entity, and after making the allocation adjustment then you come to the profit before tax after TP adjustment, which in case of India it becomes 52.89. However, if you see in case of however, otherwise it was not 52.89, so I have not given that figure, but it was not 52.89. So that's how the PSM applies, where completely the functionality of the entity as well as the value drivers really allocate the overall profit. So you actually changed the P&L of all the entities after doing these allocations, and then this is going to be the profit and loss account which will actually get audited and which will actually be used to issue the 3CB or to prepare the documentations. So there are actually the invoices are raised and the entries are passed in the books of accounts based on these allocations. So this is basically about PSM. If you have any questions, I can actually take on PSM, or otherwise I'll go to TNMM because I want to spend more time on TNMM because that's going to be practically used. I'll not say it is subjective. I'll say that it is actually applicable. I think if you remember two things, then 2 or 3 things. One is that where intangibles are playing lot of role, that's one thing. The operations of the parties are so integrated and so interdependent that you are unable to compare one of the parties with any third party in the market. So say, as I just explained you, that though this entity, one entity is doing R&D, but it is so interdependent on the other company to supply the R&D material that it cannot be compared with any third party, because at least the third party will definitely be having the material with which it has to do the R&D. In the third thing which you can see is that are you able to apply any other method? No, cost plus 6%, 8% is very much based on the scientific, the benchmarkings which we do generally to even do the RPM or the CPM or the TNMMs. So that's completely based on the Indian databases or the foreign databases which you use otherwise for the other methods also. So that is easy part, because there you are actually assigning the routine return. The difficult part is how to give the value, how to give the weight to the non-routine function. So there are 2 methods to do that. One is to actually see that what is the quantum of that particular cost in the P&L of that entity, or otherwise rely on some external study, or try to just understand that okay, it's possible that sales and marketing in this case maybe 70%. So then if you are really applying something which is not there in the papers, or it's based on the overall understanding of the business, then it should be backed up with some independent study, or at least the website results, or something has to be there, or you can even analyze the competitors' data also. But again, I mean, it's not that people are not applying it. Taxpayers are applying it, but again, I'll say it's less. It's very less. SDT, in any case, I have not seen even a single case where it is it's applied or it's even possible to apply. But in case of international transactions, we have seen, but again less, very less. It may help, but the only thing is it will help only to the extent of where you are able to certify that what are the costs which are required to be allocated, or these are the costs which have actually been incurred by this entity for this function. Only to that extent. I don't think so that it will really, the whole allocation per se, the certificate for the whole allocation is, I think, will not be under the role of cost auditor, because you are actually carrying out the benchmarks, applying, giving the routine return and then going to the assigning of value weights, etc., where the cost auditor, I think, will not be able to really authenticate it.
Is it possible to aggregate the transaction under this method? Usually in TNMM we do that, right? We aggregate all.
Yeah, actually speaking, if you see, it's the whole P&L which you are considering. So you are not leaving even a single item of overall P&L other than the taxes, which is actually below the line. Otherwise, you are considering the overall. So you are not leaving even a single expense outside the P&L. You are actually redrawing the P&L account. It's as simple as that.
In my case, if I have multiple transactions for my client, and one of them is a cup method where I have a direct comparable. The other one, PSM, it's a perfect method. So then obviously PSM will rule over cup, right? In this case.
Yeah, right. So basically, so in that case, what I will suggest is that still apply cup for the transaction where you are very clear that it has to be cup. However, that transaction will also form part of the P&L when you are applying PSM. So that also will get justified as a corroborative method by, yeah, it will have double justification, but don't really remove cup when you are applying PSM for the first transaction where you have sufficient data for giving cup. That will be better approach, practical approach.
Okay, thanks.
Right. Okay. Coming to TNMM, sorry, but I'll just have to quickly go back to the slides. Right. So slide number 12. Yeah. Okay. This is a very basic example. I'm sure everybody would know what is it. It's basically, one is that the name itself suggests that it's transactional net margin method. So it examines the net margin, net profit margin relative to an appropriate base. That means you will either see the return on sales or the return on costs or return on assets, but what you will measure will be the net profitability of that tested party. And within test party, I'll come to the segmentation later, that you can even have different segments within one company depending on the functions. What you are doing is that, taking just this as an example, you have an associated enterprise and the transaction between associated and corporate, which is whether it is at arm's length price or not, you are not sure. You have a transaction between corporate and independent enterprise where you are selling at 120. Again, you have a transaction where independent enterprise B is selling to corporate and corporate is selling to independent enterprise at C. In this case, we know that operating profit of this transaction where corporate profit is selling to enterprise C is 15. So what this entity needs to really earn, the corporate entity in the first case, what it needs to earn is 15 upon 150. Firstly, you will see that what is the external party making at net level. So 15 upon 150 is your external comparable benchmark. If I am just taking one transaction at a time, not really getting into the arithmetic mean, etc. So I will have 15 upon 150, which becomes 0.1, and then I have to apply that 0.1 to 120, which is actually a transaction on the above, and 120 into 0.1, which is 12, becomes the operating profit that this corporate should have earned while it purchased the goods from associated enterprise. So that's how you apply it, that what it should have earned. So okay, it has earned 20, but possibly the comparables are showing 22. So therefore it should have earned 22. So 22 minus 20 in percentage terms becomes the adjustment. So that's very briefly that how it applies. Right. It's as we all know that it's a potentially applicable to all kinds of transaction. Not really all kinds of transaction. I will still suggest that don't start with TNMM ever. Always start with CUP, because that's what you will be asked in the audit. Also, see, in case of like distributor, as Mr. Kane suggested, try applying RPM. CPM becomes difficult because we don't have Schedule 6 in the Companies Act does not really mandate the companies to give the data at gross profit level also. So therefore, sometimes to get a very concrete figure of cost of production which is required for CPM level, becomes difficult to apply. So therefore, if you see in Indian context, you will hardly see people applying CPM per se. RPM is still possible. Cup, any other method, I think should be the method of the last resort. And so TNMM is something which you can apply, but try to really follow this hierarchy and then come to TNMM, because that's what you will be asked by the officer as well. TNMM, see what's happening is that basically what you are doing in case of TNMM, you are just seeing that okay, whether functionally the companies are comparable or not. And when it comes to functions, as Vaishali has already taken the session in the morning, that you have to compare the functions of the two entities and then only say that yes, it is comparable to me. And functions does not only include the per se functions, but it also includes the risk and the assets. So there may be a company which has got which does not have any manufacturing facilities, but it's still processing goods and doing good, and it has got substantial turnover. And there may be another company which has got substantial facilities, very significant manufacturing facilities, and that is also processing the goods. But can those two be really compared? I think no, because this person who is really processing the goods having manufacturing facilities is more like a contract manufacturer, possibly buying raw material, then processing it, then giving it to the customer. And in the other case, the person is like a pure job worker. So you cannot really compare a job worker with a contract manufacturer. So to that extent, the functional analysis should be carried out, and therefore the assets, the risks and the functions, they all play a lot of role in understanding whether your comparables or are also on the same page. So in TNMM again, the intangibles which though play a role, which it does play a role in reaching the final profitability level. But then what you consider is that I'm comparing A with say B, C, D, E, but all of them are also having intangibles, maybe less, maybe more. But then because we all are in the same market, we all may be performing similar marketing functions, we all may be having similar intangibles, we all may be having similar facilities and similar scale of operations, and therefore we are comparable, and therefore the arithmetic mean of the comparable companies can be considered as arm's length with which my net profitability can be compared. Coming to aggregation of transaction, again you have many transactions. You have purchase, you have royalty, you have sale, you have, I'll not take guarantee and interest because those are the transactions which can further be substantiated, otherwise also not really putting under TNMM. But if you have all these kind of transactions, going to TNMM is fine, but I think firstly try to really do them individually also, and then there may be still some transactions left, apply TNMM so that all those transactions will also get covered under TNMM and then get justified. But because the transfer pricing officer and otherwise also, when you are doing it, though it's an easier approach that just aggregate them and put it under TNMM, and possibly you will be always justifying and you are able to defend your transactions also in the documentation. But it's very much possible that the revenue authorities may not follow the same approach, and they may want to see that no, royalty you have applied, we understand that you have put it under TNMM, and after paying royalty also you are able to meet the arm's length price, but you show us the benefit test. You show us the documentation with which you really ought to have paid royalty. What are the benefits, whether you actually got the increased turnover. So those are the things which also you need to maintain along with, while you may have applied, may have defended the transaction of royalty in TNMM. Again, say purchase of goods. At what price you have purchased the goods from AE, how much AE is making. So at least ask those questions from clients, how much will you get? It depends from facts to facts and taxpayer to taxpayer. But I think it's important to really ask those questions more from defense perspective. Okay, coming to the profit level indicator which has to be applied. So always remember in TNMM that the profit level indicator, say if you take operating profit upon total cost, the denominator should always be uncontrolled. So say if you are a service provider, so you are providing, if you are a BPO entity, you have cost plus 20% pricing policy. So you have 100 as your cost, 120 as your selling price to the overseas company, to the overseas company or to the Indian company. So what you should be doing overseas only, because the SDT will be from expenditure perspective. So say 120 to the overseas company. So 120 is actually your controlled transaction. Now what you are trying to justify is that whether 20 which Indian entity has earned, whether it is at arm's length or not. So you should never do 20 upon 120, because 120 denominator is actually a tainted or a controlled denominator. The third party, if you now take operating cost, that's actually something which is uncontrolled, because that BPO entity also has purchased those, it has employed personnel, it paid for the IT cost, it's paid for the salary, it paid for the rent, overheads, etc. And all those are actually uncontrolled costs inherently per se. And therefore you should always ensure that at the PLI, when you are using PLI, your denominator should always be uncontrolled. So say again, take an example of the same principle applies when you use RPM. RPM, you are buying material from your related party, but you will use gross profit, and when you are selling to independent party, you will not use gross profit upon the cost of goods sold. You will use gross profit upon sales, because sales is something which you have done to the independent enterprise and not the cost. However, in case of this service provider scenario, it will work the other way. So it depends on facts to facts. It is not something which is very difficult to understand. But I just thought that this is very important, because sometimes what happens is we just say, okay, you apply TNMM, but always remember that in applying TNMM, there are 3-4 things which are very, very important and where one should not really fail. One is the tested party. I'll come to the tested party, and I think Vaishali has possibly taken tested party concept in the morning, but I'll just briefly again touch on that. One is the tested party, second is the PLI, and third is the quantum of your transaction vis-a-vis the P&L of the tested party. So I'll just come to these 3 things. Profit level indicator, it's this. So return on assets is another profit level indicator which is used when you are a very asset intensive company. So take an example of a company which is a captive power service provider to its overseas company or to its another company. So in those kind of things, you know that power is not something which can be done by some persons in the company. You have to have significant facilities for producing power. So in those kind of cases, return on assets is a better profit level indicator. Return on assets and return on capital employed are used interchangeably, because ultimately you are actually taking the help of the balance sheet. Operating margin is basically upon sales, OP upon sales. Return on total cost, OP upon total cost. Operating profit upon total cost. And total cost, please remember that total cost will always include direct as well as indirect. It will not, it's not only till the gross level, or it's till the net level. So whenever you are advising clients to telling that, okay, how the transaction needs to be priced or what all components are required to be recovered from the overseas company, it is not only direct costs relating to the provision of those services or production of those goods, but it is the direct as well as indirect cost which is required to be recovered. In that case, you will have certain things, say, whether foreign exchange should be recovered or not, or tax is never recovered, then again interest should be recovered or not. So that depends from facts and circumstances of the case. In case the company has actually done hedging, then it's not required to really recover, but it's bearing risk, then it may be recovered. Again, it depends on sometimes even dependent on the facts. Right. So this is something very important, and I'll just recommend that whenever we are reading the agreement of the clients, so sometimes that also you can recommend, because the arm's length markup is sometimes defined, but arm's length markup on what is sometimes not defined in the client's agreements. So that is something you can always suggest to clients, that the cost, it's not only, because sometimes the authorities may say that no, you should have paid, say if it's an agreement of payment, then the TP authorities may say no, you should have only paid for the direct cost. Why did you pay for the indirect cost also? So it's better to have that particular understanding within the agreement as well. Okay. There's another profit level indicator which is used in some cases, which is called Berry ratio. Berry ratio, it actually works in case where, you know, where you are, I'll just give you an example, how can we use the Berry ratio. So take an example of a telecom company where it's a plain internet service provider, plain network support service provider to an overseas company. So what it will do is, it will have its marketing personnel, its you know, facility coordinators, etc., so as to ensure that the calls are going through and there is no connectivity problem per se. But what will happen is, to ensure that all these things are happening, it will also have to buy the bandwidth from a third party. Now what happens is that because it is buying the bandwidth from a third party and then recovering it from the group company, sometimes what happens is that now whether bandwidth is actually, in this kind of case, he's not really working upon that, on that bandwidth. It's like a kind of a pass-through cost, that, you know, I'm buying it because I am actually providing this facilitating function or giving those facilitatory services to the overseas company. So in those kind of cases, though it's P&L, how the P&L will look, it will have the bandwidth cost, it will have all other office expenses, and then the sale will have everything along with some markup. So in these kind of cases, we generally try to avoid then the bandwidth cost. So if you actually take out the bandwidth cost from your debit and credit side of the P&L, then you will be left with actually the expenses which the entity has incurred for provision of those facilitating, for that facilitating function. So this is what is generally called Berry ratio, which actually takes gross profit upon operating expenses, or in Indian context what we sometimes call is that OPVAE, which is operating profit upon value added expenses. So that means where, you know, what is the situation where the Indian entity has actually given the value add to the overall transaction. Right, so actually I spoke all this. Tested party, I'll just take up tested party a little bit. Selection of PLI we have done, and then we'll just go to the databases. Right. Now coming to the tested party. Though, you know, tested party is a concept which is actually required in all the methods, but in applying TNMM, it's a must. You just cannot escape it. So and that actually ensures that the comparability which you are doing, you will be able to really sail through before the authorities. And it's my personal experience. And in India, I think somewhere we do miss on this tested party concept, and at all levels I have seen that. So I think it's a very crucial concept to understand. So what is tested party? It's a party which is the least complex entity. So I'll just give you 2-3 examples to really understand this. And I'm not put it on the slides because you will get a lot of case laws on the tested party. There are 4-5 case laws where the foreign party has been considered tested parties and other things. So say take an example of again a BPO company. So say you have a US bank or a UK bank which has got a BPO company in India. It is getting all the transaction processing or some you know, the back office work being done by the Indian entity. Indian entity is not a customer facing entity. The complete risk of the work which is being done by Indian entity is being taken by the UK or US company. So in this case, which is the and even the processes or the methodologies with which the Indian company is actually performing its functions is all given by the overseas entity. So in that case, tell me that, you know, which company you did there's a very brief of the overall function analysis which I just spoke. So in this kind of case, which will be the least complex entity, whether the UK US company or the Indian company? Right. So in this case, the Indian company will be the least complex because it is not bearing it is not having market risk. It has its customer. The responsibility of any failure or something will possibly lie with the US UK company. Although this company will also face the brunt of it, but primarily it's not really a customer facing entity. Now take another example, a pharma company where the overall the IP of the drug is in India. The Indian entity is really manufacturing the drugs, and then there is a market company which is supporting say there's a market company in USA which is supporting the Indian company in contacting the customers. However, it is not still selling to the customers. So the goods will be sold by Indian company to the US customers directly. However, those US customers contacts or the facilitation of that whole work will be done by the US company. So in this case, you tell me that, you know, which is the least complex entity. Right, but what happens is that in the second case, we still apply India as tested party. There are reasons for that. Sometimes what happens is that we don't have access to US database. Sometimes we see that, okay, you know, the Indian company's profitability is very good, so let's apply it with the, you know, with the Indian pharmaceutical companies, and mine is at arm's length. But if you see, what you are doing is, the transaction, if you're a say 1,000 crores rupees company, the transaction and 1,000 crores is all from third parties. It's completely uncontrolled. And the transaction of that, you know, payment of that marketing support is possibly out of that 1,000 crores is only 10 crores. For justifying that 10 crores, what you are exposing is 1,000 crores. So, you know, that is the problem of when we choose the wrong tested party and when we apply the TNMM the other way. So had you used the US entity as the tested party, you actually would have seen the P&L of US company and compared it with the other marketing companies in US market. That's how you would have done it, because similarly in the first example, what you would have done is that you would have taken Indian companies BPO P&L and compared it with the other BPO entities. So similarly, you will do it in US also. You will compare it with that jurisdictions comparable. So there sometimes, you know, we as well as department and all the taxpayers also do this thing. See, there may be variety of reasons, but at least I feel that it's good to do it appropriately so that you will be able to really sail through it in long run. Short run, you may be able to sail through it, but in the long run, whether every year, because it is possible that in the next, after 4-5 years, the same company gets into losses or starts making the profits at a much lower rate as compared to the comparables. However, the marketing company is still carrying out that much functions only. So in those kind of scenarios, then the approach adopted in the initial years fires back. So, you know, that's something which we need to really take care. The similar thing which I just said, that the quantum of the transaction also makes you know, a very important role when we are applying TNMM. So say take an example, again the very similar example where the Indian entity it's a say 100 crores turnover entity and purchasing goods worth say around 50 crores from the overseas company. Or say possibly not really 50, I'll not take this example, say out of 100 crores, it is selling 20 crores to its overseas company and all other 80 crores is also exported to third parties but in other jurisdictions. So per se its cup is not applicable. Now in that case, what generally I have seen taxpayers doing is that they try to again put the whole P&L. So 100 crores P&L, compare it with comparables, arm's length or not arm's length. But really speaking, your transaction is not 100 crores, your transaction is 20 crores. So why are you exposing your whole P&L to and giving it to the transfer pricing officer? Because when he will make adjustments, so you may be at arm's length at 15%, when he looked at comparables, he will say that okay, 25%, you should have earned 25%, and what he will do is he will actually apply that 25% to the whole 100 crores. That time he will not apply 20 at 20. Although now there are many judicial pronouncements which clearly say, and plethora of announcements which clearly say that it has to be applied only to the international transactions. But what I advise is that why not itself, in the first place itself, we are able to use it based on only that transaction, because in case of sale transaction, it's quite easy to draw the segmental P&L. Segmental P&L means that you are actually dividing your whole 100 crores in two parts, 80 crores and 20 crores, and then the cost associated with 20 crores go in that P&L and the cost associated with 80 crores comes in another P&L. Compare it even internally also, because this is what even TPO is going to ask. that okay, you have sold goods to the third parties also. Functionally, you are comparable, but why are you not really comparing internally first? I understand that your 20 crores is comparable with the external benchmark. So, these are the nuances which do come at the time when we apply TNMM. Now, sir, take an example of 100 crores company, but purchase of say around 50 crores. Now, in that case, sometimes it becomes very difficult to get the data of the associated enterprise because they generally don't share. Otherwise, in that case, the least complex entity or based on the functional analysis, generally you will come to a conclusion that you should that entity should really share its P&L account and tell us that okay, how much are they making, and that entity should be considered as the tested party. But if we are not getting and we have this limitation, consider the Indian party as tested party, compare it, but then while really carrying out the benchmarking, ensure that you are applying the arm's length to the 50 crores transaction only, not yourself to the 100 crores. So, these are some very important things. One is the PLI, use of PLI, so the denominator should not be negative, should not be controlled. Second is the quantum, and the third is the tested party. So these are the 3-4 things which are very, very important to ensure that the TNMM is applied in an appropriate manner. And I think it's not very difficult to really apply it also, because one is that it gives you the, it does not really get into the routine functions or the non-routine functions or the intangibles, etc., etc. What you primarily need to see is that you are not comparing a small BPO company with an Infosys type of company. So scale of operations will be an important thing. And otherwise, you are not really exposing the whole turnover of that company. So the quantum is very, very important. Okay, I've covered these bullets. I'll just take up these 2 bullets. One is the single year data versus multiple year data, and one is the computation of economic adjustment. I've covered the other 3 in my discussion, and then we can just take a few questions on TNMM. Single year data versus multiple year data. Now, this is something which I'm just hoping High Court or Supreme Court give us something. But see, Indian regulations actually say that you have to use the data of the year of the comparables, which your tested party also has. But there is an impossibility to perform that act because while you are maintaining your contemporaneous document by 30th November of the earlier year, say by November 14 for March 14, you will never have the data of March 14 in the databases. So there is an impossibility to perform that act. And therefore, in fact, the regulations have also provided, however, you can apply the earlier 2 years if you have determined the price which you are benchmarking also based on those years. But what happens is that also becomes practically difficult to really perform. When will you start your transactions? On 1st April 2013, you would have started your transactions. So what they are saying is for the financial year 13-14, you should have used the year financial year 11-12 and 12-13. Now on 1st April 2013 also you will not have the data for those 2 years. You may have it for 11-12, but you will not have it for 12-13. Although by the year end you may do some true up adjustments and things like that. But then practically we have seen it's quite difficult to really apply that. And even when today we are in March 14, you still will not get the data for March 13 in lot of companies in the databases. So those are the limitations of the databases. So what we generally do is, or what OECD has suggested, to consider multiple year data. So of that year, and if that year is not available, of the earlier 2 years, and consider it as one business cycle. And in fact, OECD does not say of that year, it actually asks to use the earlier, that year data and the earlier year's data. Because if you see that, taking 1 year data, you never know that particular year for the whole country would have been an economic downturn. So at least that particular downturn will not impact if we consider the 3 years as one business cycle. Or it's also possible that out of your 10 comparables, one comparable would have undergone some extraordinary circumstances. So if you take those all 3 years, then those things you can ignore. So that's behind the logic behind using multiple year data. But we have many tribunal judgments where they have considered only single year data is the correct data. So what generally happens is that at the time of TP documentation, we take multiple year data because you don't have March 14 data, say by November 14. And then at the time of TP assessment, you update the same comparables. So you actually then use March 14 data and then see again that whether you are at arm's length or not. Sometimes you don't get data, so all those things again depends on the facts. The last one is the computation of economic adjustment. This is again a very important thing which you suggested, somebody suggested for the capacity utilization. So TNMM also gives you a leeway of really applying some economic adjustments in a manner that if your capacity was not completely utilized. So say you are a Indian entity is a contract manufacturer for a foreign company, but however, or a BPO company, which is a captive service provider, 100% to be given services to overseas company having a seating capacity of say around 200. But during that year, only that much work came that we could employ only 100 persons. Now, what about 100%? The Indian entity has used it has paid salary to those 100. It has done everything. So in those cases, the Indian entity should be recovering completely for 200 persons because it's a captive service provider. So that's one instance. But in another case where say Indian entity is an entrepreneur and it actually is selling goods to third parties. Now in that case it is possible that it could not really utilize 100% of its capacity because of the economic downturn or because of that particular product market. So therefore the net profitability at which it may be benchmarking its or it may be comparing its net profit with the comparables may be lower. So then sometimes we do apply capacity utilization, and in some of the tribunals it has actually been upheld also, confirmed also. In one or two cases it has not been upheld because the assessees could not demonstrate the facts that capacity was not used and it was because of these reasons. But in one or two cases the capacity utilization has been upheld, and it's well accepted globally also. So TNMM even gives you that benefit. So these are some strengths and weaknesses of TNMM. One is that it is you have many transactions, so you don't I'm not saying that you don't need to really do transactional analysis, but yes, it is finally the net profitability is less affected by those transactions. Functionally you need to really ensure that you are kind of comparable. The product differences are not really I think I should have written product differences. Simpler functional analysis is required, so it's not really like the way you have to do it in case of profit split method. It's simpler, and the results which I just started with my lecture with, that the results do resemble to the results of a modified cost plus method. So cost plus method, if you see if you are applying OPTC, the cost plus will actually see the cost of production till gross level. However, in case of TNMM, it takes it till net level. In case you are using RPM where it's OP sales, in case of TNMM also you are using OP sales, but there you will be using only possibly at gross profit level. Here it is till net level. The weaknesses are sometimes, see, it depends that your market factors, which sometimes the factors which have really affected the profitability are not quantifiable factors. So that becomes a very big problem in case of a TNMM, that okay, I am doing capacity utilization, but whether I am able to really quantify it also, or whether I am able to really justify it also with some external information. Measurement challenges is sometimes the transfer pricing officers really take high turnover companies, and those things create problems. Information challenges, as I told you about single year, multiple year data. Sometimes you are using one database or you are using two databases, the department uses one database. So sometimes annual report is not available. Sometimes you have data in the province but you don't have the annual report. So those are the challenges, but I think those are insignificant ones. Practically you can apply it. Yeah, so this we just covered. I think case study, I don't have any other case study. I think most appropriate method, I've just covered it, though we have already kind of discussed it. As I told in the beginning itself, that Indian regulations really do not provide any hierarchy, but it is suggested that you really start with cup, because that's what will happen at the time of TP assessment. And it's very important that in the TP documentation, when you are making, please discuss all the methods and then say that okay, it is not applicable, and give us a substantial reasoning to that, because it's important and critical for the next levels, if not at TPO level. This all I have actually covered, but I thought that I'll just give, because this has the degree of comparability. So all this I have actually covered in the speech. Knowledge check is something which I have actually okay, so we can actually do, if you don't see the prints, then we can do this. OECD guidelines prefer transaction-based methods to profit-based methods. So, I mean, if you have really read the OECD guidelines, Mr. Bispi Patel actually took the OECD guidelines in the morning. So, OECD guidelines prefer transactions-based compared to profit-based methods. Yeah, true. So, actually, it's all there in the paper. So, OECD guidelines actually prefer transaction-based method. In fact, the globally transaction-based methods, and within transaction-based also the RPM and the cup methods, which are more preferred as compared to TNMM, the profit-based methods. The second is that generally speaking, product comparability is more important than functional comparability. Yeah, it's no, actually it depends. I will say that product comparability is also very important, but what happens is that which method are you really applying? So in case of cup, your product comparability becomes more important. However, when you are applying TNMM, your functional comparability becomes, or RPM, so if you see the majority, the functional becomes more important. Which of the following is not a profit-based methodology? This is the simplest one, so it's okay. Right, fine. So I think I've covered much before time. I'm not sure. I hope I covered everything. Right. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take. Yeah, sure.
In that case, if my PBIT which have been computed over here, now margins which I would be calculating based on that residual profits, or based on whatever PL I selected. Now, what comparable should I take?
Okay, so
comparable companies means for if say my set of comparable companies which I have selected based on my accept reject becomes 6 comparables. So now on what basis should I accept?
So one is that it is very important that when you are doing the comparability, firstly what you will do is that you will see the tested party. So in this case, if you select US as tested party, you cannot use Indian comparables. You will have to use the databases which are prevailing in USA, and you will have to find out the companies which are actually distribution or the marketing companies in that example. So you will have to use the marketing support or the distribution type of companies which are actually carrying out marketing function in the US jurisdiction. So you will not be able to use Indian marketing support companies with that. So that's very important.
Okay, let's say no.
So let's take another example
let's
where India is the marketing support. So you will have to take Indian marketing support companies, because then the India is the least complex entity. You will be comparing Indian marketing support function with the Indian other marketing companies.
So in that case, do I also need to prove that that whatever comparable companies which I have selected is also complex and integrated companies, and hence do I need to make certain adjustment to those comparable companies also?
We are talking about TNMM,
yeah.
Correct? Okay. So
no, for RPM.
Okay. For RPM. No, say for RPM, it will not be, first of all, it will not be a marketing company, it will be a distribution company. It will be a trading company per se, which is also carrying out the marketing function for selling the goods in India. So right, so how will you, so your Indian company is actually the distribution, the distribution entity, which is the assessee. So your P&L will have the purchase of goods, sale of goods, gross profit, and then its functionality. So there are two ways to really do it, and you should actually follow both. One is that you actually do it at gross profit level, so that will be your RPM. But also see, at least also analyze, you may be very good at RPM level, but also analyze that what are you at net level. Because as I told you, that schedule 6 does not give the reflection of, you are not required to disclose gross profit. Therefore, it is possible that the comparable, while you are comparing it with the comparable companies, you may have taken some assumptions to compute the gross profit, and therefore the TPO may reject it. But taking an example where he actually rejects it, so you also do it at net level and see that whether you are meeting with arm's length price, but then you are comparable. In both the cases will also be the distribution companies, in India. And there,
in that case, it is not necessary or compulsorily I need to show or demonstrate that these are also the complex entities or very integrated companies. Hence, I also splitted their profits or
no. See, the moment you are able to find out that it's a distribution company, how will you find out? First of all, it's a distribution company. So there are ways and means to really find out that. So suppose now the set which you get is actually that of distribution companies. So and it will be, so then you don't need to make any further adjustment in that. And the only thing in case of RPM, when you are applying, or that time you also need to see that you are, to an extent, in case of distribution set, you also need to see that it's the distribution of approximately similar products or of that industry. Because it's very important, because there may be a distributor effort for some products may be very high, or in case of some industry it may be very low, or even the absolute margin or the end margin may be very different. It does differ industry wise. So possibly a distributor of a capital equipment may be actually making a very less margin. However, a distributor of a possibly say FMCG or pharma may be making high. So you, along with functionality, in case of distribution, you should see the industry. Or say take an example of distribution of software products. So those are something which you need to take care. Okay, that's a difficult question. Okay, yeah, though it's very common question. So what happens is, in case of safe harbor, frankly, when a department came up with the notification of safe harbor, they have clearly taken that out for computing the operating profit upon total cost. But in case of plethora of judicial pronouncements, it has been considered operating. Department has been taking different stands. Even one TPO and another TPO also practically taking different stands. Now what at least we have been doing, I can tell you that, and I can also tell you what OECD says. What we do is that you are comparing the functionality. So it is something that one entity may have done the hedging, the other entity may not have done the hedging, but then that does not really change the functionality of per se. So take an example of a BPO company where one entity has done the hedging, the other has not done, but BPO still remains a BPO, it still remains a captive service provider. So then in that case, take out the effect of foreign exchange so that you are then comparing apple to apple. However, and Safe Harbor also kind of, it has supported that particular thing, and very similar principle we apply for the interest expense or income also, because one person using its own capital and doing particular activities, and one person taking the capital from somebody else, paying interest on that loan, and then but doing the same activity. So take the effect of the interest paid on loan and then see the benchmark or the net profitability of that function. So TNMM actually requires to see the mapping or the benchmarking of that function, and therefore taking out the forex is a better option. However, OECD actually says that if you are actually taking, the tested party is taking the risk of that forex, then it should be considered while computing the profitability. But I think whether you consider it operating or you consider it non-operating, do the same adjustment for the comparables also, because then in that case you are at least making them at par. But the problem only comes that from the P&L you will not know that whether that person has done the hedging or not, and therefore may be bearing less than normal foreign exchange risks. So provision for, say, I can actually divide provisions in 2-3 baskets. One can be provision for impairment losses. So I think that's something which is really extraordinary, and that should be taken out because that has nothing to do with the functionality. But provision for doubtful debts is something which may be there in all the companies. However, again, provision for doubtful debt is also not something which is related to the functionality of the company. But that should also be really taken it out. But say, take an example of provision for leave encashment or provision for bonuses, and there may be many provisions because year end all companies make provisions. So those are all operating and they should be considered. But do whatever you do, then do it exactly do the same in the comparables also. Don't do. Yeah, which is return on operating costs basically. Yeah, it's total cost. Why I wrote total cost is so that to clearly give a message that it has to be direct as well as indirect cost. Yeah. Total minus all these is basically non-operating ones, which are not really impacting the functionality. And non-operating and extraordinary, yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
In case I have both purchase and sales with AE, then can I apply TNM?
You can. Take the one which is less controlled. I can only tell that. Again, see, there are ways and means of doing it. So what you can do is you can take that if you have very less purchase and substantial sales to AE, so take OP total cost as a profit level indicator and then try to justify the purchase transaction independently. So what you are taking in the denominator, if it is again, it has got some composition of controlled transaction also, then try to justify that transaction independently also. And if you are unable to do it, I will say that then at least take company as a whole and then but use the profit level indicator which has got less component of the controlled transaction. But there are ways and means to do it. So you may have to do some segmentation, get some data from the AE. So scenarios are possible to benchmark both the transactions also, even applying TNMM entity as a whole. But you'll have to just go deep into the things and then do it. But it's possible. Practically, it's possible. Yeah. Yes, we have come across. I've myself also done a lot of in case of BPOs.
How would you derive for that risk?
See, there are 2-3.
I think in one case, Mercedes-Benz, they have used CAPM method.
CAPM, right.
But how would you derive for that?
So there are two ways to really do it. One is a very simple way that you just take the interest-free securities rate and then see that what otherwise you would have really earned in the market. Subtract that and that is what you can further adjust. But that's the simpler way which we saw earlier. I think 4-5 years back there were some case laws on that. And the second is the CAPM model, which is widely used. It has not been really, it was earlier definitely not accepted by the tribunals. A lot of taxpayers have been doing. But I think risk adjustment is something that CAPM is a better model to do the risk adjustment because it takes into account the external comparables in terms of when you use the beta, when you, so a lot of what you are trying to do actually when you are doing the risk adjustment, and you are trying to take effect of that had you used this capital employed in something else. So this is your opportunity and therefore this is the risk which you are actually mapping in this business. And that's how you actually apply CAPM. Now, department has not really given any guidelines. It's a difficult method to apply. And globally also, frankly, you don't have too much literature on really application of risk adjustments. But it's an economic adjustment which has also been upheld by some tribunals. So in case you are applying it, then do apply holistically. But in case you are not applying it and you possibly think that it may be, I may require it. Say it's even take an example of working capital adjustment also. You may require it because it's possible that, at the time of DRP or at the time of CIT appeal, you may have to give something, and at that time at least the revenue authorities should not say that you never really reserved the right to carry out the adjustment, because sometimes even that some tribunals have not given the economic adjustment benefit to the assessees, saying that the assessee never did this adjustment at the time of documentation. So why the assessee should be given now an opportunity to do that? So even if you are not really doing it at that time, at the time of TP documentation, at least in the documentation always reserve a right to carry out those kind of adjustments and do it at that time. CAPM is something which we have used, and I believe it will be really considered. If as of now it has not been really considered, it's not been well accepted by at least the lower level of authorities, because it's a little complicated and there are assumptions. See, if you take an assumption of beta itself, it's an assumption. A lot of time you don't get the data also in the market for applying CAPM completely and correctly.
And for capacity utilization adjustments?
Capacity utilization is easier adjustment, because there what you are trying to do is that you are just trying to actually you are trying to see that, okay, how much capacity remained unutilized, and then draw your P&L on the basis. So your cost of goods sold would have been had only 70% cost would have been allocated to your P&L. So completely rest 30% actually goes out of P&L. So it's like that. But then it will not really be on your full P&L. You will have to identify that where are you saying 30% capacity. Is it about factory or it is about the total business? So then you will have to apply, but it's easier to apply. You have to actually take out that 30% effect completely out of your P&L. And then see what should have been your profit level indicator, what should have been your benchmark.
When I'm saying in my submission that based on the Philips case or based on the OECD guidelines, that risk adjustment benefit should have been given to me because my entity is a lesser risk bearing, whereas as that of the comparable companies. So now if my comparable company's arithmetic mean comes to 15% and my comes to say 8% or 9%. So if I'm saying 5 to 10% risk adjustment benefit should have been given to me. So now that 5 to 10% range is applied to what, 15%, or means how that benefit is being given?
So basically what's done is that you will not apply the risk adjustment to your own this thing. You will apply it to the external comparables and then do that risk adjustment.
Out of that
so 15 will become say 9. So take an example, 15, because 15 was your external comparables benchmark, so 15 will become 9 and then compare 8 and 9.
Means 15 means 10% of this 15.
No, it will not be like, it does not work like that. So 15 minus 10. Okay. So if your risk adjustment actually is 10, then it will be actually 15 minus 10.
So it's 5.
So it actually becomes 5 and your tested party margin is 8. So you are at arm's length. So it's like that.
Friends, I think there are several more questions I'm sure you would have. You can take it offline, and since we've already come to the close of the session, may I request Nathubai to propose a vote of thanks.
Before the pleasant task, I would like to draw your attention to two important programs by the International Taxation Committee itself. There is an intensive study course on FEMA at the very same venue on 18th and 19th April and 25th and 26th April. And there is an International Tax RRC, there is 8th conference to be held at Hyderabad, Novotel Hyderabad, and there are about 7 interesting papers and presentations. So those of you who are interested may take advantage of these programs. They are very well designed programs, and the FEMA course is meant for beginners as well as those who want to go really deep into that program. So I request all of you who are interested to enroll for those programs. Now coming to the pleasant task, and on this Women's Day, what could have been better than to listen to Ms. Ruchi say. She has dealt with 2 extreme methods. One is the profit split method, which is rarely dealt with. Another extreme method, that is transfer pricing this transactional net margin method, which is mostly used or maybe mostly misused method, because many times when we have other methods lying inside our data, most of the time we try and tend to use TNMM method. And she has nicely dealt with the intricacies of the methods and how to defend. Ultimately, transfer pricing is not a price, but a best defense that you can offer for the prices that you have arrived at. And she has nicely dealt with the subject and also explained how to defend the method that you have used and our prices. And she deserves a very well-deserved vote of thanks. I request you to carry out with a very loud applause. There are 14 female participants, and this Women's Day, I request all male participants to also felicitate with loud applause. Thank you, friends.
Friends, the second day of our course is on 22nd March, not on next Saturday, so just kindly take note of it. Thank you.